I don't remember the exact day I realized I was invisible in my own home, but I remember the feeling. It was the sting of being dismissed mid-sentence, the way my voice would trail into silence, while everyone else's words were carried like gospel. My name is Violet. I'm 28 now, but the story I'm about to tell you began when I was a little girl, barely old enough to understand the difference between fairness and favoritism, but old enough to feel its cut like a blade. I was 8 the first time it hit me that I didn't belong the way my sister Allie did. She was only a year younger, but somehow she glowed in my parents' eyes, as if the sun itself had chosen her to orbit. I remember Christmas morning, the one seared into my memory like a scar. Allie unwrapped a new dollhouse 3 stories high, painted white with blue shutters with tiny furniture crafted in detail so fine it looked real. I unwrapped a sweater, itchy wool in a color I hated. My mother clapped her hands and told Allie she was the luckiest girl alive. My father beamed at Allie's laughter camera, flashing over and over to capture her joy. No one noticed that I didn't smile. The pattern didn't stop there. Every birthday, Allie had balloons that reached the ceiling, cakes shaped like castles, friends filling the yard with noise and color. My birthdays were quieter affairs, store-bought cake, a candle or two, sometimes a present if they remembered. When I asked why, my mother always said, "Allie just has more friends, Violet. You don't like being the center of attention, do you?" But I did. I wanted to be seen. I wanted to be celebrated. I found solace in the presence of my grandparents. My grandmother especially had a way of pulling me into her lap, brushing my hair back, whispering, "You are enough, my sweet girl." When she passed, I was 14, and the house lost its only warmth. My parents mourned, but I think I mourned differently. I mourned the only person who ever made me feel like my existence wasn't a mistake. After she was gone, they cleared her room of furniture and gave it to Allie as a private study. I was moved to the living room, my bed pressed beneath the framed portraits of ancestors who never knew my name. It was as though I had been folded away into the margins of our home, a ghost living where no one belonged. My father used to say Allie had a spark. She wanted to be a model, and my parents funneled every resource into that dream: private lessons, photography sessions, expensive clothes. I wanted to study literature. I dreamed of writing stories, of being the one who told the tales, instead of just living through them. But when I mentioned college, my father frowned. "That's a luxury, Violet. We can't waste money on something impractical. Allie has real potential. She can bring pride to this family." Pride. That word became a knife carving me out of their story every time it was spoken. Even at school, I felt the weight of it. Allie strutted through the hallways with confidence, her clothes always new, her smile always praised. I wore hand-me-downs that never quite fit. Teachers noticed her. Boys noticed her. I became the shadow beside her, light tolerated, but not cherished. I learned to shrink myself, to keep my voice low, to swallow the bitterness building inside me. But bitterness has a way of fermenting, of growing sharp until it cuts you from the inside out. When I was 16, I got my first job at a diner after school. I scrubbed tables, balanced trays, learned the ache of standing on my feet for hours. Every paycheck I slipped half into an envelope and handed it to my parents, believing it would help us all. My mother would smile, pat my hand, and tell me I was so responsible. But when neighbors asked how bills were paid, they bragged that Allie had gotten a part-time job at a boutique, never mentioning my name. I listened from the doorway once, as they laughed with pride, saying Allie was carrying the family on her back. I wanted to scream. It was my money keeping the lights on, my hands blistered from grease and bleach. But they gave the credit to her. Always her. The resentment grew, but so did the guilt. I wondered if maybe I was the problem. Maybe I wasn't lovable enough, not bright enough, not beautiful enough. I started keeping journals, filling page after page with words I couldn't say aloud. At night, under the watchful gaze of my grandparents' photographs, I wrote about the ache of being overlooked, about the fire I felt trapped inside me with no place to burn. Those journals became my sanctuary, the only place where Violet existed fully. One evening, I overheard a fight between my parents. Money was tight, tighter than they admitted. My father's voice was harsh, accusing, while my mother's was trembling. And then I heard it. Violet can pick up more shifts, she doesn't have a future like Allie anyway. I froze. My chest felt like it had collapsed. In that moment, I understood I wasn't just invisible. I was expendable. I remember going to Allie after that, asking if she ever felt the weight of their expectations. She looked at me like I was speaking another language. "They love us both," she said with a shrug. "You're just too sensitive." Too sensitive. Another blade, another dismissal. The years bled into each other. I graduated high school with no celebration. Allie failed her first college audition, but was showered with comfort and promises of another chance. I worked double shifts that summer, saving pennies while she spent dollars. My parents never asked me what I wanted, only what I could give. And I gave until there was nothing left but exhaustion. Still, somewhere deep down, a spark flickered. A stubbornness I didn't inherit from them, but from my grandmother. She once told me, "The world may overlook you, but you must not overlook yourself." I held on to those words, clutched them like a lifeline. Because even as my parents clipped my wings, I dreamed of flying. Looking back, I realized that my story didn't begin with betrayal. In adulthood, it began with 1,000 tiny betrayals stacked on top of each other, layered, until the weight was unbearable. It began with birthdays, forgotten achievements, dismissed sacrifices unseen. It began with a girl who wanted nothing more than to be loved equally, but who learned instead that love could be conditional, rationed, weaponized. And it all set the stage for what was to come, the reckoning, the breaking the decision that would change everything. I was 18 when I realized exhaustion could become a second skin. By then I had graduated high school without a party, without even a dinner in my honor. My diploma sat in a drawer, ignored, while my parents planned another photo shoot for Allie. She had failed her first round of auditions for a modeling agency, but my parents called it a temporary setback, something that could be overcome with just a little more investment. I wanted to scream. Investment meant my money, my labor, my hours sacrificed. I got a full-time job at a small bookstore downtown, the kind of place that smelled like paper and dust, where I could pretend for a few hours that words had the power to save me. I loved the quiet, the order of the shelves, the way customers came looking for stories that might change their lives. I envied them. My life was nothing but an endless loop of work, handouts, and invisibility. At the end of each week, I handed over cash to my parents. They smiled and called me responsible, but when neighbors came around, they said Allie was the one helping them. I swallowed my fury until it burned holes in me. There was one night I'll never forget. My paycheck had just come in, and I had been hoping, just hoping that maybe I could buy myself something small, a book, a dress, a sign that I mattered. But when I walked through the door, my father was already waiting, hand outstretched. "Rent is due," he said flatly. My mother stood behind him, her eyes sliding away from mine. I gave him the envelope, every dollar I had earned, and went to bed hungry that night. In the living room, Allie scrolled her phone, nails painted a fresh shade of red I knew she hadn't paid for. I learned quickly that silence was survival. To protest was to be accused of selfishness. To ask for fairness was to be called ungrateful. They had an entire vocabulary to keep me small. Allie needs this more. Allie deserves the chance. Allie just has potential. Violet, you'll understand one day. But I never understood. At 21, I tried again to talk about college. I had been putting away coins in a jar, saving secretly, knowing my parents would take it if they discovered it. I imagined a world where I could sit in a lecture hall, raise my hand, speak my thoughts aloud, and have them matter. I brought it up at dinner, cautiously testing the waters. My father laughed. "College? You don't be ridiculous. We don't have money for you to play pretend." Allie smirked over her plate, and my mother stayed silent. That silence cut deeper than any insult, so I buried the dream and worked harder. My 20s became a blur of double shifts, bookstore by day, diner by night. My feet ached, my hands cracked, my back screamed, but I kept going. Every month I sent money home, and every month my parents praised Allie publicly for her generosity. The unfairness was a poison I carried in my veins, one that made me sick, but kept me alive. The worst was when Allie herself joined the charade. She'd bragged to friends about how she was supporting mom and dad, how much she sacrificed for them. I would overhear her lies and feel the world tilt beneath me. Once I confronted her privately. "Why do you let them think it's you?" I asked. She shrugged her eyes cold. "Because it works. Because they want to believe it. And honestly, Violet, you're too weak to fight them." That night I cried until I couldn't breathe. But deep down something hardened. Weakness wasn't what I felt, it was rage chained down by duty. Then came the call that changed everything. I was 23 at work when my mother phoned in tears. "Your father is sick," she said. "We're drowning in bills. Allie can't manage it alone." I rushed home, terrified, heart pounding. When I arrived, my father sat in his chair, pale but alive. The bills were real, the debt undeniable. But Allie wasn't carrying the burden. She had quit her job months ago, still chasing modeling auditions with no success. And still they asked me to give more, to work more, to save them. I did it because I couldn't watch them crumble. I worked until my body screamed, until sleep became a stranger. And still they gave Allie the credit. Still they looked at me like a mule and her like a princess. It was around that time I began to write again. Late at night, after double shifts, I'd open my journal and let the words pour out. I wrote about betrayal, about invisibility, about the rage I could no longer contain. I wrote about my grandmother's voice, her reminder that I was enough. And for the first time, I began to wonder, what if I walked away? What if I stopped feeding the machine that kept crushing me? But walking away isn't easy when you've been raised to believe your worth is tied to what you give. I felt trapped in their narrative, bound by guilt and obligation. Every time I tried to imagine leaving, I heard my father's voice. "You'll regret it. Family is everything." Family. What a hollow word it had become. At 25, the cracks in the illusion widened. Allie's failures grew harder to hide. Agencies turned her down. Photographers refused her calls, and whispers spread that her career was dead before it began. Still, my parents clung to the fantasy. Still, they poured resources into her image while draining me dry. I saw it clearly, then they weren't blind. They weren't mistaken. They chose her, always her, because to them, I was nothing more than a tool. The resentment that had fermented inside me began to boil. I looked at myself in the mirror one night. My face pale from exhaustion, eyes hollow, hands shaking, and I whispered, "This isn't living." And in that moment, I knew something had to change. The betrayal wasn't new. It was 1,000 tiny cuts stretched over decades. But the decision to stop bleeding, that was mine. And though I didn't know it yet, the reckoning was coming. The day would arrive when I would stop being their shadow, when I would claim my own light no matter how much it burned them. The breaking point came slowly, like water wearing down a stone. At 26, I was working 2 jobs, still funneling money into my parents' house, still erasing myself so Allie's illusion could shine. Every time I walked through their door, exhaustion on my back like a cloak. My mother's eyes would light up, not for me, but for Allie, who would be showing off another photo shoot no one had paid her for. One evening, I came home with groceries I had bought for them, stretching my paycheck to cover what they couldn't. Allie was lounging on the couch, scrolling her phone. My father sat across from her, nodding proudly as she chattered about a big audition. My mother fussed around her like she was porcelain. No one asked me how my day had been. No one noticed the bruises on my hands from carrying boxes at the store. But then something happened that cracked the illusion wide open. I went into the kitchen to put away the groceries, and I overheard my parents whispering. They didn't know I was there. My mother said Violet will cover it, she always does. She doesn't complain, that's her role. My father replied, "She owes us. She should be grateful she even has a roof to stand under. Allie's the one who will make us proud." I stood frozen, a carton of milk heavy in my arms, my breath caught in my throat. Gratitude owe them. For years I had been their lifeline, their quiet safety net, their invisible savior. And still I was nothing but a duty, a shadow. The rage that bubbled up inside me was no longer something I could silence. It pulsed through me hot and undeniable. That night, I didn't eat with them. I went back to my tiny rented room, pulled out my journals, and read every word I had ever written about being overlooked, erased, used. And I cried, but not the soft tears of a child longing for love. These were sharp, burning tears of a woman who had finally seen the truth. The truth was simple: they would never change. My parents didn't want me to thrive. They wanted me to sacrifice. They wanted me small, obedient, silent. And Allie, she thrived on it, feeding on my efforts like it was her birthright. I began to plan in secret. I cut my expenses down to nothing. I worked longer hours, but this time I saved the money instead of handing it over. Each dollar I tucked away was a brick in the wall I was building between me and them. Each coin in that jar whispered freedom. The day came when Allie's big career collapsed. She was 24, still clinging to the dream of being a model, but no agencies wanted her. Word had spread, her reputation was ruined. She returned home in tears, and my parents rushed to comfort her, showering her with sympathy, telling her it wasn't her fault, telling her she was still destined for greatness. Meanwhile, I was expected to cover the rent again to pay the bills piling up on the kitchen counter. But something in me had shifted. I looked at Allie's tear-streaked face and felt nothing but clarity. She had been handed everything, and still she failed. I had been handed nothing, and still I survived. For the first time in my life, I realized where the true strength lay, and it wasn't with them, it was with me. When I told my parents I wouldn't be giving them money anymore, the explosion was immediate. My father's voice thundered through the house. "Ungrateful! After all we've done for you, this is how you repay us!" My mother wept dramatically, clutching her chest as though I had struck her. Allie sneered, spitting words like venom. "Selfish. You've always been jealous." But I didn't flinch. I had rehearsed this moment in my head 1,000 times. My hands shook, but my voice was steady. "I don't owe you anymore," I said. "I've given you everything I had. And it was never enough. So now I'm keeping what's mine. For once, I'm choosing me." They screamed, they begged, they accused, but I walked out that night with my bag slung over my shoulder and my savings tucked safely into my pocket. I didn't look back. The silence afterward was deafening, but it was also pure. For the first time, I wasn't carrying them. For the first time, my paycheck went toward my future, not theirs. I enrolled in online courses. I worked my way into a new job, then another, each one better than the last. Slowly, painfully, I began to build a life that was mine alone. But the past doesn't let go easily. My parents called over and over, leaving voicemails dripping with guilt and threats. My mother's voice pleaded, "We need you, Violet. Don't abandon your family." My father's voice growled, "If you walk away, don't bother coming back." Allie even called once, sneering through the phone. "You'll regret this. They'll never forgive you." And yet, with each call, each voicemail, I felt lighter. Because I realized forgiveness was no longer what I wanted. I didn't need their approval, their twisted version of love. What I needed was freedom. At 27, I moved into my own apartment. Tiny, sunlit, imperfect, but mine. I hung shelves filled with books I had bought with my own money. I wrote again, not just in journals, but on a laptop, drafting stories I had once been too afraid to dream of. And I breathed. Really breathed. But family ghosts don't fade quietly. The storm was far from over. Allie's life was unraveling. My parents' debts were deepening, and they would soon come knocking again, louder, more desperate than ever. And when they did, they would learn that the girl they had dismissed, used, erased, had become a woman who no longer bowed. They came back into my life the way storms come, loud, messy, and demanding attention. I was 27 when the first knock rattled my apartment door. I knew that knock before I even opened it. Heavy, impatient, my father. When I pulled the door open there, he was dressed in the same pressed shirt and polished shoes that once terrified me into obedience. But his eyes were different now. They were frantic, darting like a man standing on the edge of a cliff. My mother hovered behind him, wringing her hands, and Allie stood further back. Her makeup smudged her face hollow. For a moment, I almost didn't recognize her. The girl who had once basked in cameras, now looked like a reflection of failure she couldn't Photoshop away. Violet. My father began, his voice already coated with authority, though weaker than I remembered. We need to talk. I let them in, not because I owed them anything, but because I wanted to see it, the unraveling I had always known was coming. They sat stiffly on my small couch, looking absurdly out of place in a space I had built for myself. My mother's eyes scanned the walls, the bookshelves, the little plant on the windowsill, as though searching for evidence of my life without them. It was Allie who spoke first, her voice trembling. I need help. She told me the truth, or at least pieces of it. Her modeling career was over. She owed money to people she couldn't repay. She had moved back in with our parents, but they were drowning too. Debt stacked high, collectors calling everything falling apart. I listened. My father cleared his throat, trying to reclaim control. You've done well for yourself, Violet. We see that. And now it's time to step up. Family takes care of family, we need you. The irony almost made me laugh. For years I had been family only when it meant carrying them. Now stripped of illusions, they came crawling back, and suddenly I was visible again. Step up, I repeated, my voice calm, even. You mean pay your bills, cover Allie's mistakes, erase everything you ignored until now. My mother's eyes filled with tears. We're desperate. You're all we have left. The words hit me like a revelation. All we have left. They had gambled everything on Allie and lost. And now suddenly I was valuable. Not because they loved me, not because they believed in me, but because I was all that remained. I looked at Allie then. She wouldn't meet my eyes. For years, she had smirked in triumph as I bent under the weight of their favoritism. Now she was crumbling, and I felt no triumph, only clarity. No, I said finally. The word felt like fire on my tongue. I gave you everything once, and you discarded me. You told me I was too sensitive, too selfish, too unworthy. You let Allie take the credit for my sacrifices. You pushed me aside so many times I nearly believed I was nothing. But I am not nothing, and I don't owe you any more. The silence after that was electric. My father's face darkened, his pride stung. Ungrateful, he hissed. After all we've done, all you've done. My voice rose sharp, steady. You took and took until there was nothing left. You gave Allie everything even when she failed, and me nothing even when I gave you my soul. You don't get to rewrite history now. My mother sobbed quietly, her hands covering her face. Allie finally spoke, her voice small. Violet, please, just this once, help me. And there it was, the moment I had once dreamed of. The sister who had been exalted above me, begging for my help. But instead of satisfaction, I felt something else, pity. Pity for a girl who had been raised on delusion, who had been told she was special until the world proved otherwise. I can't, I said softly but firmly. Because helping you would only keep you the same. And I won't let myself be destroyed for you again. My father stood, anger radiating off him. You'll regret this. Blood is blood. I stood too, facing him without fear. No, blood is not a debt. Family is not a weapon, and I am not your sacrifice anymore. They left that night, the door closing behind them with a finality that echoed through the room. I stood there, shaking but free. For the first time I had chosen myself not out of spite but out of survival. In the weeks that followed, the calls came again. Angry voicemails, pleading texts, even letters shoved under my door. I ignored them. I built my life brick by brick, investing in myself, nurturing the parts of me they had tried to bury. My writing grew, my work flourished, and slowly the shadow of them receded. But one night as I sat at my desk finishing a story, I received a message that made my chest tighten. It was from Julia, a cousin who had always seen through the cracks of our family. She wrote, "They're losing everything. The house might be gone. Allie is in ruins. They talk about you constantly, how you abandoned them." I stared at the screen, waiting for guilt to surge. But it didn't. Instead, I felt an odd peace. Because the truth was, I hadn't abandoned them. They had abandoned me long ago. And finally, I was done chasing people who never wanted me whole. When the final reckoning arrived, it came not as a bang, but as a whimper. I was 28 when Julia called again, not with warnings this time, but with news. "They've lost the house, Violet," she whispered over the phone. "The bank took it. They're staying with an aunt for now, but it won't last. They keep talking about you like you're the villain in their story." I sat in silence, the words settling over me like ash. I could picture it so clearly, my father pacing in a stranger's living room, pride fractured, muttering about betrayal. My mother weeping into tissues, telling anyone who would listen that her eldest daughter turned her back on family. And Ali sulking in a corner, still waiting for the world to hand her the life she was promised. Part of me wanted to feel triumph. For years, I had dreamed of this moment, the scales tipping, the people who had buried me finally facing the ruin of their own choices. But instead, what I felt was something quieter. Sadness, maybe. Or acceptance. Because by now, I understood that revenge isn't always fire and fury. Sometimes it's just survival, living a life they swore you could never have. A week later, there was another knock on my door. Softer this time. Hesitant. When I opened it, Ali stood there. Not the glowing, polished version of her I remembered, but a hollow shadow. Her hair was unkempt, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. She looked smaller somehow, like a balloon finally deflated. "Violet," she whispered, voice trembling, "I didn't know where else to go." For a long moment I said nothing. Memories surged, her smirks, her dismissals, the years of taking credit for my sacrifices. But layered over that were flashes of childhood, the nights we whispered secrets in the dark, the way she once clutched my hand during thunderstorms. I let her in, but only into the entryway. She stood there, fidgeting, eyes darting around my small apartment. "They're lost without you," she murmured. "We're all lost without you." I shook my head. "No, Ali. You're lost because you believed their lies. You believed you were entitled to everything while I was meant to serve. And now that the lies are gone, you don't know who you are." Her lips trembled. "Maybe I don't. But you're my sister. Aren't we supposed to help each other?" I looked at her, really looked, and for the first time I saw her not as my rival or my tormentor, but as another victim of our parents' favoritism. She had been spoiled into weakness just as I had been starved into strength. We were two sides of the same cruelty. But pity is not the same as forgiveness. "I can't fix you, Ali," I said softly. "And I won't destroy myself trying. You have to learn what I had to learn, that no one is coming to save you, not even me." Tears welled in her eyes, and for a moment I almost faltered. Almost. But then I remembered the years of silence, the loneliness of sleeping under our grandparents' portraits, the sting of being invisible while she basked in false light. And I held my ground. She left that night, shoulders hunched, and I knew I might never see her again. When the door closed, I leaned against it, my heart heavy but steady. This was the final severing, the last thread tying me to a family that had never truly claimed me. In the months that followed, I built a life that was mine in every sense. I published my first short story in a small magazine. I moved into a brighter apartment, sunlight streaming across the desk where I wrote late into the night. I filled my shelves with books my younger self once longed to read. And I surrounded myself with people who saw me, who chose me, not out of obligation but out of love. Sometimes late at night, I still think of them. I wonder if my father still clings to his pride, if my mother still weeps for the image of family she lost, if Ali ever found the courage to stand on her own 2 feet. But those are not my battles anymore. Their choices built their ruin. Mine built my freedom. And if you're listening to this, if you've ever felt like the forgotten child, the scapegoat, the one buried so someone else could shine, hear me now. You are not what they made you believe. You are not invisible. You are not expendable. You are enough. And you can walk away. Because sometimes the greatest revenge is not in their destruction, it's in your survival. In building a life so full, so unapologetically yours, that their absence becomes nothing more than silence. So if this story touched you, if it made you feel less alone, I ask you to like, share, and subscribe. Not for me, but so that these words can find the ones who need them most. And leave me a comment. Tell me if you've ever carried the same scars, if you've ever had to walk away to find yourself again. Let's remind each other that being underestimated is not the end of our story, it's only the beginning.